But the main lead, I would say, is the character of Marie Moreau, which is just, that is a superhero name, chat, Marie Moreau. And she's played by Jazz Sinclair, who I'm not overly familiar with, but man, after this, I want to see her in more stuff.
Hello, and thank you for checking out the video. I just want to let you know that I not only create content on my YouTube channel, Class in the Glass, but I'm also on Twitch, where I review movies, cartoons, and TV shows live, while also playing single-player games and multiplayer games. I also have a Patreon, where subscribers have access to hundreds of video and audio commentaries for films and cartoons, as well as podcasts and videocasts. In the meantime, thank you again for watching. Enjoy the video.
We're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to the next part of my show, which is my review, my full thoughts on Season 1 of Gen V. Now, I talked about Gen V a couple weeks ago. I reviewed like the first several episodes, kind of give my general impressions. But now I can safely say that I've watched the entire season, and I have a lot to say about this particular season, this spinoff of The Boys. But again, a little background, a little history for this. This is, of course, set in the world of The Boys, and Gen V follows a new generation of would-be superheroes that test their physical, mental, and moral well-being at a prestigious school for superpowered kids. All the while, these same kids try to unearth a sinister conspiracy that's endangering their lives and the lives of their fellow students. Now, as I said before, in my initial impressions for the first several episodes, I was initially a little trepidatious, right? The Boys, it's been a huge hit, as I said. It's obviously been a huge hit for Amazon. And again, I think it's arguably their most popular show. I think that's like the big show that you subscribe to Amazon Prime for. It's what gets you watching. It's what gets you to renew your subscription, right? And again, it took a graphic novel that, in my honest opinion, was absolute garbage. Was trash. I read the first volume, like that's enough. That's all I need to read, because I think it was just edgelord garbage and had edgelord sensibilities and was just meant to shock you. That's really all it was there for, in my opinion. I'm saying this is someone who likes some of Garth Ennis' other works, love Preacher, but it's not the same with The Boys. But they reworked it in such a way. They reworked it extensively and changed a lot of it, and for good reason, and turn it into the hit series that it obviously is today. It's one of those cases where the adaptation is better than the original source material in every single way, and they were absolutely right to make the numerous changes that they made, okay? Because it led to a much better story. It led to a much better characters and provided it with more depth. And it still has the shock in there. It still has the shock value. There's no doubt about that. There's no denying that. But that's not at the forefront. That's not the thing that's always leading the episodes, which is great. And, listen, we also got some other Boys content before. We got the animated anthology series Diabolical that I liked. I thought it was fun. Again, it's an anthology, so you get some episodes you like, get some episodes you don't like, right? I think it was reasonable, though. We were worried that Amazon, they were just going to milk this series to the point where we would just start getting kind of generic, uninspired content. And I feel like some of us felt that way initially about Gen V. However, we saw those trailers. I was like, okay, the trailers look pretty cool. I was liking what I'm seeing. It's like it's still, tackling the sociopolitical aspects of this world just from the perspective of college students, of teenagers. It's getting into social media. It's just with teenagers, like, oh, this is cool. And of course, it has all the superhero antics that you could possibly want, right? And listen, having finally completed the first season, I can say that the show more than lives up to the quality of the original Boys series, of those first 3 seasons. And again, it features fantastic direction and writing and acting from a relatively unknown cast. I mean, I didn't recognize some of these people. I've seen some of them in other things, some character actors like Clancy Brown, etc. But a lot of these people are relatively new to me. And it's great. And, of course, it has the same level of blood and gore and shocking effects that have kind of become hallmarks of the Boys and its other, spinoffs. It does the best thing possible as a spinoff, where it complements the original series very well, but at the same time, it establishes its own story, its own characters, that are by themselves very, very interesting. But I do imagine that a lot of these storylines, a lot of these characters will also most likely factor into The Boys. I am convinced that this series is going to factor heavily into the 4th season of The Boys, thus making it required viewing for the inevitable 4th season. Because I'll tell you right now, there are characters from The Boys that are in this show. You know, some expected faces and some unexpected faces, and how they weave them through that storyline. They're not the dominating factor in it, but they're clearly there, and they are going to be setting the things that they do in this particular show up in the inevitable next season. And I know it's kind of like a double-edged sword, because it's like, well, it's really good, but at the same time it's like, well, I gotta watch this now. It kind of runs into the the MCU problem, where it's like, I gotta watch these TV shows, I gotta watch these movies, understand what's happening in this film, right? Kind of get a little overwhelming, but thankfully this is just so good that you're probably going to enjoy watching it anyway and not feel like, well, I feel obligated. It's like it's gonna be like a feel good obligation, if you will, because it's on that same level of quality, And that's the thing. The show has a very huge cast. It's got an extensive cast and a lot of great subplots and some really interesting tertiary stories going on in the background. And, of course, the world building and some nice, funny gags that are repeated throughout it, obviously. But for the most part, we focus on, like, several main characters. But the main lead, I would say, is the character of Marie Moreau, which is that is a superhero name, chat, Marie Moreau. And she's played by Jazz Sinclair, who I'm not overly familiar with, but man, after this, I want to see her in more stuff. And, the series primarily starts with her. And, of course, in typical Boys fashion, we get an incredibly tragic and horrific backstory. And I don't want to spoil too much, but, she has this telekinetic blood ability, chat. This, I think it's, how do they explain it? This hemokinetic. It's called hemokinetic. And where she is able to control her blood. Telekinetic control over her blood. And, of course, that leads to a number of horrific things, and it certainly is in the opening of this show. And but it's actually a very interesting power, because we don't have, the closest thing I can compare it to is obviously bloodbending from Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. The way in which she uses her powers is very similar to the characters of Katara and Hama from the 3rd season of Avatar, and similar to Amon in The Legend of Korra, how she's able to manipulate her blood, and she discovers like new abilities throughout, obviously, the entire series. Also, very disturbing, and gross power, and to the point where it might be a little rough to watch her use her abilities, because, and this is the thing, like at the beginning of every episode, the stuff that they had to do in this series, where I'm kind of surprised that they're able to get away with as much as they did with this show, especially because it deals with kids and like school campuses and college campuses and things. But for like her in general, there's a lot of self-harm in this series, not just with her, but of other characters too. And like how she initially uses her powers is by cutting herself quite frequently. And they show it. It's not like we're going to cut the camera away. It's like, no, we're going to put in those sound effects, and where she literally like has a knife that she uses, this custom knife, and she cuts her hands and she manipulates the blood out of her hand. She shoots it at different people. It's just like, wow. And so it's visually, it's disturbing. And, since we're seeing a lot of self-harm, but like her story is captivating, and it's tragic, because one, she's lived a pretty miserable life throughout her entire childhood due to, the horrific circumstances which her powers came about. She's trying to find her sister, who she's extraordinarily estranged from. And, she enters in this school that is just so obsessed with is so obsessed with, presenting yourself off as something that you're not, right? And she had this idea, like, I want to be a hero. I want to be a good guy. I want to save people, because I was not able to do that when I was younger. And she's in a world where that's the least thing. That's the one thing people are least concerned with, right? And she has to deal with a lot of selfish, narcissistic people. It's very much, she's like this is a naive girl first entering into the world of the boys, and she is a lamb in a den of wolves, and that's what it is. And she has to acclimate to this. So that's the other part of the show. It's just like, how do you like operate like within this world itself? And that's in itself like really interesting and kind of thrilling to see. But then you have this whole other big conspiracy going on where it's like, okay, this school might not just be a school. There's something very disturbing going on beneath its bowels, right? And of course, it's, filled with corporate intrigue and conspiracy. And you have a lot of bad people doing very bad things. And it involves a lot. That's the other thing, too. Again, it involves a lot of kids, a lot of horrible things happening to children. And that's why I'm kind of shocked that they got away with so much as they did. I mean, it's kind of like, hey, I'm glad you're able to tell the story you wanted to tell. But, there's like a lot of scenes where there's almost like you could look at it. It's like, this is like a mass shooter on campus. And he's doing like horrific things. Like you do have these super battles going on, and they typically end in really bloody fashion. It's like, wow. And so the fact that they were able to kind of get away with that was, impressive, right? But again, at the same time, I can understand where that might be a little too much for people. It might be a little too close to home, hitting a little too close to home. It's like, I think that's reasonable. But, everything that they're doing, I feel like it's not just exploitive. It's not just for shock. It's like, this is part of this story, and this is what would happen in a world like this. And like, honestly, chat, if we had a world with superpowers, stuff like that would happen with great frequency. And so it feels earnest. It feels natural for this world that they have obviously established and created. Now, we have a number of other like great characters in this show, and I've talked about them at length. We have Andre Anderson, who's played by Chance Perdomo, and he is this telekinetic ability to manipulate metal in the same way as like Magneto from the X-Men comic books from Marvel. And, he's dealing with like being this like legacy kid because his dad was this superhero named Polarity, and he's on the school board. And so he's trying to live up to his dad's expectations. He's trying to be kind of the next Polarity, but dealing with, the things that like I don't want the same things that my dad wants for me. I want to live kind of my own life, right? And, that also coupled with the fact that there's some enormously tragic things that happen with him and his friend group that leads to a lot of conflict. But I've never seen this actor before, and a lot of these actors before. I think most of the cast. There's a couple exceptions. But he has a great role. And they do a lot of great stuff with him and his dad and a number of these other characters. And that kind of leads to like the rest of the cast too. We have the character. I didn't really talk much about her in my initial reviews because she was just kind of, and not that she was bad, she was kind of there. But the character of Kate Dunlap, played by Maddie Phillips, who she has like a rogue-esque power, I would say, where if she touches you, if you touch her hands, like normally it'd be okay, but if she tells you to do something, like you would do it. Like, if she told you to, like, I don't know, rip your dick off, then you would rip your dick off. Like, that's what would happen. She has, like, this intense mental connection with you. And when she tells you to do something, you're going to fucking do it. And initially, like, in the first 3 or 4 episodes, something tragic happens to her and her boyfriend, played by Patrick Schwarzenegger, who Luke Riordan, that's the character that he plays in the show. And I was like, okay, so, she has that trauma and everything, but they do something with her. I think I want to say like episode 5 on. They said her something. Again, I don't want to speak too much on her character because she is like one of the big standouts of this episode. But they really go into like how her powers have isolated her for her entire life based on a really tragic thing that happened to her when she was a kid and her little brother. That's all I'll say. And it's pretty much isolated her from her parents, isolated her from so many people. And she's in physical contact is very difficult for her. And it also opens her up to manipulation. And we see that in this particular season. And she goes through the ringer, and she has a lot of changes that she goes through personally, interpersonally. And they have a great episode, all I'll say is like where we go within her mind and how messed up and how distorted her mind is and what a tragic character she is, but even tragic characters can do horrible things. We can feel bad for them, but at the same time, it's like, maybe you shouldn't do something that horrible, but inevitably, she does. And so she's great. She's a huge standout. Another great standout. It's funny because she initially started as more of like a comic relief character, and that is Emma Meyer. Her superhero name is Little Cricket, and she's played by Lizzie Broadway. And she is great, where she has she has a shape-shifting ability, where she's able to increase her size. Very Ant-Man-esque, right? She can become very little, or she become very big. Now, the twist with her powers is, the only way that she can become very little is if she purges herself. if she vomits up food, which is like, another self-harm aspect of the show, which is really disturbing to watch. And the only way that she can increase her size to become like a giant is if she binge eats. And so it's like, God damn, that's a whole bunch of issues she's got to deal with. But she uses like humor a lot of the times to kind of cover up her self-loathing, the abuse of her mother, like psychological and physical abuse of her mother, who taught her how to purge and everything. It's like, oh man, that's the kind of content that we're dealing with, the kind of topics that we're dealing with in this show. But she, outside of the more horrific aspects, and even her comedy, which she uses that to kind of cover, I think, her own self-harm and her feelings of inadequacy. She has a lot of great dramatic scenes in this show, and I think you can make an argument she's kind of like the heart of the show too. And she's trying to work through her issues and how she's working through those issues like with other people who have a lot of other problems going on with their lives too. I initially, she started out as like a lot of these characters, much like Kate. She started as one thing, but she grew to be so much more. Like, again, I think this whole show should be, it's like appearances are disturbing, or appearances can easily be manipulated in such a way where they are something completely different. And that is very much the case with her. And I really loved her performance, and she was one of the best aspects of this show. And we also, I've talked about this other character before in my previous review, and they also were fantastic. And that was the character of Jordan Lee, who's played by two different actors, London Thor and Derek Liu. And so interesting about this is that this character is a bigender. They describe it as a bigender shifter, where in their male form they have like super durability and strength, super strength. But when they're in their female form, they have like energy projection, energy blast. And they're also dealing with the fact that sometimes I feel like a man, sometimes I feel like a woman, and they're changing. So they're dealing with all the aspects that come with that, all the drama of that, and also parents that don't like the fact that they transform into like a girl. They're used to having a son, right? But then, their son is not always feeling that way. And how they handled it. And again, that character starts as kind of just being a fucking a jerk, a dick. And we learned so much about them and their backstory, and I love what they do. And plus the abilities. That was like such a genius way to handle that. To handle like a trans character, with a superpower where their superpower is to be, is bigender, is to be trans. It's like, oh, that's fascinating. And I absolutely love them. They have a lot of personality. Just a cool look too. Really stood out. And both actors of London Thor and Derek Liu were great. No matter who was on screen, they were doing such a great job. I don't know who I like more. You like them both equally, chap. So they were fantastic. We're also introduced to the other character of Sam Riordan, who is the younger brother of Luke Riordan, who was played by Patrick Schwarzenegger. Sam is played by Asa German, I think that's how you say the name. And they have a whole spectrum of powers, super durability, super strength, super agility, super speed, all that. But they're fucking nuts. Like they're crazy, and they're being experimented on by, the school. And again, they trick you. Like at first it starts out like, oh, this could be kind of like a jokey character, almost like kind of like the Deep in a way, where constantly, they have these, these delusional psychotic episodes where they just imagine a world of puppets. And so that's how they mask like some of the most horrific violence you might have seen in the trailers, like where you have like, what's of all the Muppet death in here? It's like, he's the guy that constantly sees everything, or a lot of the time sees everything as like as Sesame Street, or like, the Muppet Show. And so you'll have like entire sequences with him, and they're really well done, where he's in his own Muppet form and he's fighting against other Muppets, and he's like ripping them apart and exploding them, but it's all like fucking confetti and sparkles and shit. But like in reality, it's just meat and blood and just exploding everywhere. And all that is like really good. But the other interesting aspect of his character is that he's this guy who clearly is dealing with, some type of disorder, possibly bipolar. And he's been living in like an isolated environment for so long, and so he's kind of naive. He doesn't really understand everything. Like he has some knowledge of the outside world. Like he has some funny lines in that regard, and he has like a really special connection with Lizzie Broadway's character of Emma, of Little Cricket, and he really loved their relationship too. It's kind of very sweet. They have very similar senses of humor, and they complement each other really well. And I did like that, but there's a lot of tragedy with his character, and he's anytime he's in the room, you don't exactly know what he's gonna do. And since he's like one of the strongest, superheroes in the show, that makes him like really terrifying because it's like we don't know what's going to set this guy off. And we've already seen like how destructive, how vicious he can be, whether he sees everything as a puppet or not. It's really disturbing what they do with him. Such a great performance by him. And also a way in which they kind of bring in like Patrick Schwarzenegger's character again of Luke Riordan, who is, again, he's sporadically featured in the first after the which he's focused on a lot in the first episode. After that first episode, we focus on like he's only in a few more in small little individual scenes, but he's also great and kind of acts as almost like his Jiminy Cricket, if you will, that's on his shoulder trying to help him along the way. And then you also have your villains in the show. You have the character of Indira Shetty, played by Shelley Khan, I think that's how you say her name. And she's like the dean of the university. And she's also this behavioral therapist. And, she's basically trying to, market these kids, try to get these kids in the 7 or set them up with all these different deals and things. But, it's like, okay, so she's just kind of like this amoral scumbag doing this and is being manipulative. Well, there's a whole other aspect to her character that is tragic, that is actually tied deep into the previous seasons of The Boys. So it's like, oh, that's why you're doing what you're doing. I thought that was really cool. And, of course, what happens with her leads into what's probably going to happen in Gen V Season 2 and also with The Boys Season 4. But I really liked her role. Loved her relationship with a number of the characters and where she's using basically her abilities as a psychiatrist, as a behavioral therapist to manipulate Marie Moreau, to manipulate, Kate Dunlap. And it's just like, oh, but, you see it, but the girls, because of their respective tragedies that have affected them for their life, they don't. And it's like, no. And it's kind of sad when you see it happen. But she's also like really, really good in the series as well. And you have a ton of other characters. Like if I had any like big criticisms, if I had any like really big, they introduced a character in this series called Tech Knight. And I forget the actor's name that plays Tech Knight. But Tech Knight he's pretty much like a combination of Iron Man and Batman in the comics. Here they change him up completely. They make him where his ability is he's like a detective. And he has his own detective show. But he's also the guy that investigates like problems for Vought. And they set him up, I forget in the 4th or 5th episode, they set him up as like a new antagonist. And it's like, he's like really scary and intimidating. Because he's able to he analyze your body chemistry just by looking at you. He can detect the sweat. Like he's like a master detective, and he's vicious and he's amoral. It's like, I want to see this guy again. And I really loved him, but they established something with him in like the last third of the episode that he's featured in that kind of turns him into a joke. And I'm like, you know what? That was the part where they do have a lot of body humor and things and a lot of, stuff that's kind of geared in that way. And I would have almost preferred had they not done that with him, because I thought, wow, this character is really good. And now that you've introduced that element with him, now he's just kind of like, well, he's not scary anymore. He's just kind of, all right, well, anyone can easily manipulate this guy. And so I was like, that was really frustrating. And so that was like the one part of the show that I didn't care for, where I feel like the humor undercut the actor did a great job. It's not the actor's fault. It's more the writing's fault in that case. I feel like kind of failed that character towards the end of their appearance. And I would like to see them again. Now I'm at a point where it's like, I don't really need to see that guy again, which is too bad because I liked what they did with him. And I'm sure Boys fans are going to probably be upset because they changed so many aspects of that character. But still a good performance. And again, you get the rest of this, this conspiracy story mixed with this college dramedy that also features all the body horror you could want and a lot of, backstabbing, between students and teachers vying for control and power over one another, even if it's just for a fleeting moment. But that's because this world has geared everyone to think in a very specific, selfish, narcissistic way. And to see like those people like get their comeuppance or sometimes just sneak by, it's always like it's always really thrilling to see that, and I really like that. And and again, like The Boys, like the first 3 seasons, I have to say that this show just might not be for everybody. It's disturbing. It's really disturbing subject matter that involves kids, that revolves around teenagers. But, if you go in with that knowledge, like, okay, I'm going to see some disturbing stuff, and it's going to involve kids, and it's going to involve teenagers. If you're a fan of The Boys, and I think if you enjoy deconstructive superhero content, which is what this is, whether you like that type of content in books or TV shows or movies or whatever, I think I have a pretty good feeling you're going to really enjoy this show. You're going to walk away from it feeling how I did and be like, wow, this is just as good as The Boys. And I want to see more. And, it already got greenlit for season 2, and I buy it because this was kind of like must-see TV week for week. And they did the smart thing where they didn't release it all at once. They were like, I think the first week they released like 3 episodes, and after that it was like 1 episode each. And I think that was like really, really smart. And, yeah, I love it. I think it's great. It's a really good piece of genre content, and it makes me excited for obviously the next season of The Boys. That's what we're going to get first for the 4th season, but then also Gen V season 2. How's this all going to play into each other? Because they've announced that they announced that Boys season 4, the most of the season takes place only a couple days after the events of Gen V. And again, there are some major players from The Boys involved in Gen V. And so it's like, well, these two are going to feature in both, respective shows. So I can't wait to see how that's all going to play out. But again, for me, Chad, this is a great show. This is much watch, especially if you're a fan of the first 3 seasons of The Boys. What about you guys? What do you think of Gen V? Did you like it as much as I did? Did you not particularly care for it for some of the reasons I listed? I'm actually curious. Let me know.
I hope everyone enjoyed the video, and I want to take the time to tell you about my Patreon, Class in the Glass, which offers hundreds of film commentaries and video reactions to numerous movies, TV shows, and cartoons. If you're a fan of shows like Batman the Animated Series and Avatar: The Last Airbender, or films like Aliens and Raiders of the Lost Ark, my Patreon is the platform for you. Currently, I'm doing a subathon to reach 75 subs on the platform. If we hit 75 subs, we'll be able to start voting on the next edited YouTube reaction, which will include actual clips and scenes from the movies and shows I comment over. Choose from such films as Fire and Ice, Masters of the Universe, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, or Spawn. Subscribing at any tier level is appreciated, and feel free to give feedback at any time. Thank you again for watching the video, and see you next time.